and welcome to episode 125 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
I'm James Whittingham. This week, EV sales are set to take off in the United States, and there's not a damn thing Joe Manchin can do about it.
The oil industry may have developed a rather large war chest to fight climate action. Okay, let me check the figures here. All right, they've only made $3 billion a day every day for the last 50 years, so nothing to worry about.
The UK is going ahead with a new nuclear reactor. The cost at least twice of what Boris Johnson's COVID budget is.
A large U.S. offshore wind farm project has hit a snag. They've discovered unexploded munitions. Wait, maybe that's what the oil industry has been spending their money on.
All that and more on this summer edition of the Clean Energy Show. How are you this week, Brian?
I'm good. First of all, I want to address the timeline, the continuity of the timeline here. You're going on vacation, so we're recording the show a week in the past.
Yes, this is from the past. So if anything big has happened and we're not talking about it, it's because my feet are up at the cottage looking at a lake.
Yeah, well, as I recall, the first time you went to the lake at our cottage, you nearly killed yourself on your bicycle.
Oh, God, Brian, I still have the scars.
The next year, you nearly died from heat exhaustion.
Yeah.
So this sounds like a fantastic vacation plan you've got.
Well, maybe it's going to be UFOs this year. I don't know. We'll see what happens. I'll be careful. Thank gosh I was wearing my helmet too last year, or 2 years ago.
Yeah, so I have an update on my Electrify Everything project, which is here in my house. We've been trying to get rid of natural gas. So we've sort of decided on the next step in the process, which is insulating the ceiling. So in our house, half the roof is a vaulted ceiling with no attic, and then half the roof has an attic. So there's kind of two different sections. The whole house, I feel, was probably designed in California because it's a fantastic house and we really love it. But it's this low slope ranch bungalow, this mid-century modern bungalow. It just feels like it was designed in California because the roof has just not worked over the years. We've had leaks almost every year that we've lived in the house. In the summer, in the winter, we've got condensation, we've got leaks. I think the problem right now is actually, I think, the footings from the solar panels. So we have solar on our roof that was put in 5 years ago. And I think that either the footings were not done quite right, or maybe the wind came along and blew the panels and maybe pulled them up a little bit or something. So right now, the ceiling in our kitchen has been completely torn away. We took down the drywall and we've noticed at least 4 different leaks in the ceiling. So probably that's from the solar panels. So
is that vaulted?
Yeah, this is the vaulted part of the ceiling. And so what we've decided to do is remove all the drywall in the vaulted part of the ceiling. So this is about half the house, and we're going to spray foam all of that. A bunch of our house is spray foamed. We want to upgrade all the insulation, basically, eventually, so that the house is more energy efficient. I hate waste, as we discussed last week. So the more insulation you can put in the house, the better. But we've been doing it kind of piecemeal over the years. Never had the budget to kind of just spray foam the whole house. If I could go back in time, I think I would do that. Buy the house, ripped out all the drywall, spray foam everything, and start again. Here in the bomb shelter, this is actually the first place that we spray foamed in the house, here in my 1962 fallout shelter in the basement. One of the first things we did was spray foam and put up drywall and finish this and turn it into a bit of a studio. So that's the plan. We're going to kind of do it, the roof, in 2 phases, because we realized to do both halves of the house, it's just too much for 1 year. And tradespeople are booked. They're busy. We're worried that our ceiling is going to be opened up by the time we hit winter, and that would be no good. So that's the current plan. We're going to rip down all the drywall in the vaulted half of the ceiling, spray foam it, and re-drywall. So that's going to be our summer project.
This is not a good news story, Brian. Solar on roof adds to leaking. That's not good.
Yeah, and I will emphasize that it's a low slope roof, which is definitely part of the problem. The lower the slope, the just more frequent you're going to have leaks. It's even like we've got asphalt shingles, which is kind of the standard around here, and there's some thinking that says you shouldn't even use asphalt shingles on a roof that's this low of slope. Like it's just asphalt shingles are meant for a steeper rake than that. So this is it's a huge project and a problem. And yeah, it's hard to know. Like I say, maybe the footings were not quite installed right. Like when you put solar panels on your roof, I've always kind of wondered how they do it because, you don't like to poke a hole in a roof, like that can cause a leak. But presumably there's a way that you do it with the footings where it doesn't cause a problem. So either they were not installed quite right, the low slope doesn't help, and then, we've had huge windy days. Maybe the wind has kind of pulled the panels up a bit and kind of ruined the footings or something. We're not really sure, but spray foam, drywall, and then somebody to remove the panels and kind of check on the footings. That's our next phase of the project.
Well, that'll be interesting to follow. I'll be following closely.
Yeah, I'll keep you updated, and we'll hopefully do the whole roof in phase 2.
So here in a cold part of Canada, what we do, we have attics. And in some parts of the southern states, they have nothing in their attics, right? Even in Texas, when it got cold, it's like you learn that people don't have any insulation because, they don't really need it. But we have a lot of insulation because most of your home's heat goes through your ceiling, through your roof, goes up. So that's where you need the most insulation as far as the thickness of it. So we can add, several feet of it if we want to. I mean, it's diminishing returns after a while, but it's, probably 20 to 30 inches could be done and give you a really, depending on what you're using. Now, with your vaulted ceilings, you don't have that attic. You only have how much? Do you have like a 2x4 worth or
it's
larger?
Like, I think it's a 2x10 beam, so I think it's 10 inches.
Okay, so that's pretty significant. Do you know the R value that you can get with spray foam at that depth?
Not off the top of my head, but
that's the best bang for the buck for that situation, though, right?
Yeah, and the spray foam should help with the leaks, although ideally you don't want it leaking at all. Like, again, hopefully we fix, with caulking or something where the footing is.
Are the leaks coming from where the beams are, the boards? Because that's where the solar panels will be installed into.
It's I don't know. It's hard to say.
Okay. Yeah, it is. It's tricky unless you're an expert that, because the water follows gravity and you got to have forensic skills to determine where it comes from sometimes. And it can be very, very tricky. Okay. So I live close to a refinery, and I talked about 4 years ago. A group of journalists contacted me that are doing this large investigative thing on refinery pollution and stuff like that. And there was different people who contacted me. There's newspaper reporters, there's TV reporters, there's independent people, there's journalism students working on it. It's a big group of people. And I just wanted to say that they finalized my paragraph in the book that one of the journalists is writing about this. But I'm surprised at how long it took to finalize one paragraph. Like everything was wrong. I had to go back and forth. My name was spelled wrong. She misinterpreted, and I'm not blaming her. I'm just saying the process of the credit to her for making sure it was right, because she made damn sure it was right, even though it's one paragraph and everything. That's why, they send it to you to make sure that it's right. So it was implied that I moved to the neighborhood I moved to because I wanted the wide open spaces. That's not true.
Yeah.
I knew from having friends here in high school, shout out to the Karchewski twins. I used to come here in high school and visit them. And then the refinery was much smaller, but it was way stinkier because they had less pollution controls. And it was just hideous. It was like being in a sulfur vat or something. It was like it just hit you terribly. And I said, I'm never going to live here. But then what I was doing, I was trying to live down on the other end of the city where you live, and I was trying to find a crappy house that faced south because I wanted a passive solar house. I was going to convert it into a passive solar house. But what I did accidentally is I expanded my search to the whole city, and I actually found a passive solar house, one that I could actually afford. And so
Yeah.
I jumped on it and I did some renovating here. Could use some more, but I'm very happy to live here. And we took advantage of the open spaces because we are next to a pipeline that has a wide open field. And we've cross-country skied. We've flown kites. We've played baseball. There's a soccer field. We've made the most of it when the kids are growing up. And we love it. And it's just nice not to look back at other people's houses, too. It's a nice view.
And James's house is kind of related to a very famous house called the Saskatchewan House, and there's a Wikipedia page about it. But the whole idea of passive solar houses kind of started here in our city with the idea of a super insulated house that they built in the 70s called the Saskatchewan House. James's house was built kind of based on that design. It was like a research project. And then the whole passive house movement, which really then kind of took off in Germany, they used the research from here as a kind of a starting point.
Yeah, and the idea of passive goes back, generations.
Sure.
People would use, stone and things like that would absorb the heat, and they would face south and stuff. But yeah, I think that the people who built my house based on that kind of ran out of money because the insulation in the attic is bad and it had to be upgraded. It needs to be upgraded. But yeah, it's interesting, and it didn't take off. It was during the energy crisis in the 70s. Did you know that heat recovery ventilators, the air exchangers that bring in fresh air, which is maybe not a good idea here, actually that recovers the heat as it's exchanged, was developed in that house. So it's something that was used worldwide now. Was developed in this modest house that was a research project. And you can still go look at the house, which is fascinating to look at.
Yeah.
So she says I said the refinery was 2.5 kilometers away. She pointed out that it's 1.6 as the crow flies. And believe me, there's crows around here. I tried to run over one the other day because,
you shouldn't have pissed off the crows, James.
I'm at war with the crows, Brian. You know that. They know that. They're going to remember next year. Yeah, but there's just a lot of misunderstanding over one paragraph, and now that is straight. So, Brian, Tesla is starting to expand their dry lithium cathode production. This is something that is different than wet because the dry part of the battery is supposed to be cheaper and better. And this is something we've been following because they bought this company that had developed this, and we were thinking, oh, it's going to be huge, but it turned out eventually, after years, it's not that huge. But the 4680 factory in Fremont, California, is the prototype factory for these, and has surpassed 1 million cells of production so far. But they're building another factory, and also Giga Berlin will be making these kinds of batteries.
Yeah, well, Tesla announced a lot of kind of new technologies at their battery day, which was a couple of years ago. And really the whole perspective from Tesla is it's all about scale. Like, none of this makes sense if you can't scale it up to massive, massive, massive production, because we have to replace the entire oil-based energy and storage industry, and we're going to do that with batteries. So Tesla was kind of looking at the way this was done previously, and there was this wet electrode making process which everybody used, but it takes up way more space and it takes way more time. So Tesla was looking for a way to kind of speed up this process to be able to make more batteries in a smaller amount of factory space. So they came up with the dry electrode process, which has turned out to be very difficult to achieve. So it sounds like they have, I guess, partially achieved it. I'm not sure.
I wake up, and I'm not exaggerating here, it seems like I wake up every morning to news of a new gigafactory for batteries.
Oh, yeah.
Announced.
We can't keep track of them. We've sort of stopped, reporting on them because there's too many.
It's pointless now. It's just incredible. How much battery production is going online, or has gotten off the ground. So, yeah, it's quite incredible. I really look forward to watching prices come down and battery improvements take off.
Yeah, of course, one of the promises of the EV era is that, the prices are supposed to drop, but just because of what's happened in the world lately with supply chains, the price of EVs has been creeping up, unfortunately, when it was supposed to be coming down. But, that day is coming. Costs will drop. there's a report here from The Guardian. It's a little depressing. We've kind of reported on, figures like this before, but I don't know. I thought this was worth mentioning again because it was kind of another way of kind of stating these figures of really how much the oil industry has earned over the years. And it turns out it's a lot. The oil industry has made roughly $3 billion a day in profits every single day for the last 50 years. So,
and are they ever whiny little B words? They.
You'd think they'd be happy with all the money that they made. So in terms of a total amount for the last 50 years, that's $52 trillion in profit.
Staggering, Brian, staggering.
So it's no surprise really that they're trying to obfuscate the facts surrounding this. This is extremely similar to the tobacco industry, who suppressed information about cigarettes causing cancer. The oil industry obviously has known about climate change for decades, but with profits of $3 billion a day. And so I think they can see, the end is near, but unfortunately, it's not anytime soon. Like, this is going to continue for another couple of decades, that they're going to continue to make $3 billion a day. And I guess, all the oil executives, everybody in play, they're probably around our age, so they're, for the rest of their lives, they're going to continue to make this $3 billion a day. So they don't particularly care, I think, about the end game. But, those numbers were just kind of staggering. So I thought it was worth mentioning.
I was just watching some of the 3-part documentary series on big oil, how they've, created all this BS in the world and have fought back. There's a 3-part series that's on Frontline on PBS that aired April, I think. And it's actually on YouTube. I think an individual put it on YouTube, so I was watching it. And it's also part of a BBC project called Big Oil v. The World. And that just came out on BBC now. So everybody in Britain is talking about that. All the climate people in Britain, I think it's a big deal, this documentary, and that it's really, it's really shown the true colors of oil.
Well, and as your experience with this book project points out, like, this kind of like research and production and documentary making and journalism, like, is extremely difficult and time consuming. This, they interviewed you for that book project and that journalism 4 years ago, and it's taken that long for all of that work to kind of come to fruition. But when you want it to be comprehensive, when you want it to be accurate, this is difficult stuff. It takes a long time.
Brian, you've had lots of stories from Power Magazine over the day. You don't mind if I start reading it too?
Yeah, this is a website I found. I mean, I assume it's a physical magazine as well, but I read the stories on the website, and they have some excellent reporting there.
So I decided to follow it, and I came up with a story that I thought was interesting, or that I'm interested in. It is that the UK is throwing support behind Sizewell C nuclear power plant construction, something they've been debating whether to go ahead with this. It's 2 nuclear reactors, and the costs of building the new plant show the price tag could balloon to as high as $52.4 billion, which is... I don't want to, I'm not an economist, but that seems like a lot of money.
Well, that's a few days profit for the oil industry right there.
Right there. So EDF has said it expects Sizewell C will take 10 to 12 years to build. And
that's
what's going to happen in 10 to 12 years? Wind, solar batteries, pocket change. A lot, significantly less than they are now.
Imagine what you could buy with wind, solar, and batteries for $52 billion.
And by the way, the solar project we talked about last week in Saskatchewan, Canada, 2 years from proposal to operation.
That's even a bit longer than I would have expected, but obviously quicker than these ridiculous nuclear plants.
You have to consult with the community and do environmental assessments and reflectivity and birds and everything, just to make sure that it's okay. So the government officials have said that Sizewell could be eligible for financing under the UK's Regulated Asset Base, or RAB model, which enables companies building new facilities to be paid during the construction phase, meaning energy customers, regular people, will have to pay for the project when construction begins, not 10 to 12 years from now when you get the benefits from it. Holy crap, would I be pissed off if I lived in the UK. Holy mackerel. So the ratepayers are sharing the risks of the delays and cost overruns, which always happen in nuclear reactors. Always. Never not happen. And those overruns and delays cost, some places are 20 years instead of 8 years, like the huge delays. So it'll be majority owned by France Utility, EDF, and it'll be built in Suffolk, a fishing village about 110 miles northeast of London that has been home to nuclear power at the Sizewell site for more than 60 years, so they're accustomed to it there. The grid infrastructure is there to connect it, and the plant is expected to have 3.2 gigawatts of generation capacity, which is the equivalent of 3 typical nuclear reactors, according to officials who on July 20th announced their support for the project. The plant is expected to feature 2 1,600 megawatt pressurized water reactors, and EDF will redesign the reactor to avoid a repeat of fuel rod failures that have led to a plant shutdown in China. This is more questions because we haven't done a lot of nuclear building that, the people are dead who made the nuclear plants, all the nuclear plants, and now, new safety regulations. It's tough to do nuclear these days. So they presume it's going to prevent malfunctions from those rods. But France, of course, is the people who have very expensive electricity right now because half their nuclear plants are offline this summer.
And as we had to discuss last week, they're so worried about their electricity production, they're telling air-conditioned shops to close the doors because they're leaving the doors open with the air conditioning on. Okay, so I've got a report here from a New Scientist as well as Auto Evolution, and it's about a wind farm project off of Martha's Vineyard in the U.S. This is a very large wind project. It's 800 megawatts per year. So this is going to power about 400,000 homes and businesses in the area. Offshore wind, as we know, is becoming a big thing now all over the world, but starting to particularly take off in the United States. So they started building this wind farm and they found unexploded ordnances, which are essentially military weapons that did not function as intended, meaning they were supposed to explode. I'm not sure what they were bombing off of Martha's Vineyard.
Maybe test pilots or something like that, or during the World Wars. They're still finding unexploded ordnance from World War II in Europe. Yeah. It's just amazing when you see a story like that from time to time.
Yeah, military weapons that were supposed to explode, but did not explode. I'm not sure what they were bombing off the coast of Martha's Vineyard.
Let's say that it's training for World War II or something. Or maybe, the U.S. Army is a lot bigger. They could be training anytime, I suppose, and shooting things.
Or, they were just, flying by in a bomber and they were just littering or something.
We got to get rid of these bombs. We don't have enough gas to get home.
Yeah, who knows? But in any case, so they've found these unexploded ordnances off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. These are military ammunition or explosive devices which did not function as intended.
Now, I would expect... I'm no geologist, but I would think that these things would get covered up by plant growth and sediment, and you wouldn't see them. I guess you could take a metal detector out somehow. They probably would have to do that.
Yeah, I guess either they found them that way or they found them by, digging up. I'm not sure, but, they got to take care of this before they can finish the wind farm project.
I wonder if how that explodes underwater. Like something that is meant to explode above water. I don't know. But they still find this stuff in Europe from World War II. Yeah. Which is a reminder that war is bad and we should not do war. Less war.
War is bad. That's the official position of the Clean Energy Show.
Anti-war. Wow. We were talking last week about a volcano in Japan that was threatening a nuclear plant. So, unexploded ordnance. That's a first on the Clean Energy Show, Brian. 2.25 years into production and then some that we've heard that one. So, yeah. Brian, Bloomberg, earlier in July of this year, projected that EV sales are going to take off in the United States. Why? Because they've estimated that the sales have hit the magical 5% of new car sales, which is considered to be, among other technological adoption things, the beginning of the S-curve, where it starts first as early adopters, then it hits acceptance, and then it takes off. We're seeing that here in Canada, aren't we?
5% doesn't sound like a lot of the market, but the way that these technological adoptions occur is that's roughly when the line starts to go vertical. You know, it 10, 12 years ago, hardly anybody had a smartphone. And then you hit 5% penetration and boom, the line just goes straight up.
Then it shoots up to 80 or 90%, and then the curve levels off again because the old people want to hang on to their flip phones. And people want to hang on to their gas cars who just don't know any better. But yeah, that is the magical place. And we are 7.5% in Canada, which amazes me. And you can see it, although where we live, it's probably where the worst part of Canada, or one of the worst parts of Canada for adoption. Actually, it's very healthy way up north above the Arctic Circle. I'm amazed. There's not very many people up there, but the percentage of people who have EVs is actually pretty decent, just like it was in Alaska. So yeah, when you hit that threshold, I mean, for one thing, prices come down because you've started the production of them. You're starting to master the technology, starting to make enough of them where the price starts to come down. People see their neighbors driving them and start to learn about this stuff. They see their neighbor has a color TV back in 1970, and then they decide, yeah, maybe I want one of those. So Norway hit that threshold of 5% way back at the end of 2013, which is like a year after my electric car was made. My Nissan Leaf is made at the beginning of 2013. And 9 years later in Norway, and keep in mind that Norway is the leader of EV adoption in the world, thanks to the band Aha. Mm-hmm. Check our previous episodes for that. And they're now at 84% or more EV market share. And that is not plug-in, Brian. That is EV, 100% battery electric vehicle.
Yeah.
And China is triple that now. Okay, they're at 17% market share of new vehicles, but they hit the 5% threshold only 2.5 years ago, which surprised me. I thought it'd be longer than that.
Yeah, that's it's kind of triple in 2.5 years.
Yeah, that's pretty darn significant, especially when the pandemic has been a large part of those 2.5 years. So, by the way, and when we went on the air in February of 2020, if you can say going on the air for a podcast, and since we're old school, you're a former DJ from radio, I'm going to say it. Portugal, Sweden, Switzerland, and France hit the 5% threshold when you and I went on the air with this podcast, episode 1. So yeah, those are the people who did. But Sweden, Brian, is now a whopping 30% already. In the time we went from starting our podcast, they've grown that much. So they're really taking off. The United States is at the bottom of the list of EV adopters at 5%, but it's happening there. I mean, as far as industrialization, there's obviously a lot of places that have a long way to go in Africa and in parts of Asia. The world just surpassed 20 million electric vehicles on the road, and that figure is predicted to double by the end of next year. So when that happens, it's taken off. This is what we predicted on show 1, and it's just taking off. So 90% of the world's EV sales have come from actually the United States, China, and Europe. United States, big country, lots of people, lots of money. So that means that countries responsible for about a third of global annual auto sales haven't passed the tipping point. None of the countries in Latin America, Africa, or Southeast Asia have made the jump. And if they do, it's uncertain whether, if once the last parts of the world, and the last third, we're not sure that we can keep up with the mining of battery materials or not. That's going to be a big question. But then it's a question all the time anyway.
Yep. Progress has to start somewhere.
And I've got another story here. This one's interesting because we were talking about the intricacies of solar panels and their angles, and if they should rotate, and if they should use bifacial panels that would take up reflectivity off the ground, if it is worth it. I'm fascinated by this because like I said last week, I had a solar panel on my little camper, and I would play with it and angle it at the sun, and then go out later in the afternoon and change it and watch the voltage go up and how that was all affected. Researchers in Germany claim this. Keep your pants on for this one. Researchers in Germany claim vertical solar panels may be better than horizontal solar panels, and we'll remind you that solar panels, if they're fixed, are either on a roof, which is whatever the roof angle is, but if they're on the ground and they're fixed panels, they're angled to get the maximum exposure and production of electricity on an annual basis, which means they're balanced mostly for what the best summer production is when the days are longest and the skies are sunnier. So they are predicting that vertical panels may be better than horizontal panels. And you're probably asking, what the hell, James? Why is that? Well, typically solar panels are mounted horizontally and oriented towards the south to get maximum exposure as the sun travels across the sky. And instead of lying flat, these are angled at, well, they're not angled flat, but typically, if they're fixed, they're 20 to 35 degrees in the States. They're closer, as you said last week, to 45 degrees where we are because we're, the sun is lower in the sky. So depending on how far from the equator you're, located. So researchers at Leipzig University of Applied Sciences claim that mounting bifacial solar panels with one side facing east and the other side facing west vertically would produce more renewable energy and reduce one of the side effects of traditional solar farms, an abundance of electricity at midday and not enough in the morning and afternoon. Because you look at our graphs of our solar panels, and you can see it as a U shape or a reverse U shape going up and down. And so you have an abundance. You don't necessarily need the most electricity at midday because you're at work, or, you come home, you turn on the heat, the air conditioning, and you start cooking supper and washing clothes and doing TVs and computers. You need more at the peak. Well, if they're facing, this is kind of an advantage that you have because you have panels that face in different directions due to the nature of your roof, right?
Yeah.
Mine just faces south, so I get that comment. But, if you made more by facing west, you get more sunlight, more energy at that peak time. I would argue that it would be interesting to study this further, and I'm sure they will. You could make they make peaker gas plants that have turbines run for the peak demand. Well, maybe you could have a solar peaker plant that just faces, the time that's ideal, like at 5 o'clock at night, which is a concept that blows my mind because we've never thought of that before.
No, this is amazing because last week we were talking about the solar farm near us, which has a single axis tracking, which you described as it sort of tilts from the east in the morning and then tilts to the west at night. Is that correct?
That's correct. It lies flat. So in the midday sun, it's actually flat.
And that project is also bifacial. So, we're thinking, okay, well, we get lots of snow in the winter, so the bifacial is great because light gets reflected off the snow. But it turns out from the figures that we got from the people who made the farm, it's not that great, like what you get off the back of the panel for these bifacial panels. But this is crazy. This makes a lot of sense. So you just put the panel vertical, and then you're essentially getting equal production from the front of the panel that you do from the back of the panel because, half the day you get max from one side and the other half max from the other side.
Some thoughts on this. I wonder if you'd have to have extra expense in mounting them because they'd have to have better wind resistance.
Yeah, that's probably true. Each of them is like a sail then suddenly.
Yeah. But then you also, if you're in a climate that has snow like we do, not a problem. It's not going to collect any snow at all if it's vertical.
Yeah. We have that problem for sure. Snow is a huge problem.
You don't have to move them. So these are not tracking, so that saves money there. So maybe you put that money into extra stability for the vertical design. I also wonder, Brian, if they'd last longer because you're not facing the harshest sun of the day and deteriorating the panels. I just wonder if maybe they would last longer. And that lowers your low levelized cost of electricity over the lifetime of the installation too.
Yeah, this is fascinating. I'm really interested in this because, as you know, I'm working on a cottage project. We want the cottage to have solar on the roof and hopefully be, net zero for electricity. But I've been kind of struggling with a bit with how to put the panels on the roof because it's going to be a flat roof. And so normally you'd have those racks where they're, kind of tilted 45 degrees or something like that. But I'm kind of worried about how that would look. Like I don't want the panels to be too obtrusive. Like we want this cottage to blend into the surroundings as much as possible. And we were talking about bifacial, like we'd like to have bifacial panels on the roof. But maybe this is an option, like put them in rows vertically rather than at the normal 45 degree. I think I'm going to have to look into this.
Yeah, I think it's early days here, but it's very interesting. I'm sure some solar installers are just laughing at this saying hogwash.
Yeah.
But another advantage that flows from mounting the panels vertically is it allows room between them for crops to grow. So you're hardly taking up any space at all. Just these thin lines of where the solar panels are.
Yeah. You just have to have them far enough apart so they're not casting shadows on each other.
Yeah, they will cast shadows, and some things will benefit from the shadows. Some crops will actually benefit from the shadows in certain parts of the world. Farm machinery can get through to operate underneath. And bifacial solar panels can use solar energy from both sides. So installed in the east-west orientation, most electricity is generated in the mornings and evenings. So this would reduce the need for electricity storage. So you lower your cost of storage because you have to factor that into it. How much do I spend on storage? And this lowers that requirement.
There's a more equal production throughout the day.
It's more equal production throughout the day. So you're storing less to use in the daytime if you do it properly, and you use the storage just for nighttime. So at the same time, the space for electricity generation is actually quite low. Radical, fascinating subject to keep an eye on. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I would have never thought that there was yet some other way that solar panels could be mounted. Because I know a few months ago, we had a story about just laying them on the ground. Like that's another way to do it too. Like you save all the cost of the mounting hardware. You just lay them flat on the ground, and that works surprisingly well as also.
Wow, and it takes up less space too. So, you're going to just wipe out your guest house, right?
Yeah, there's just going to be one building. Yeah.
And how close to the guest house will the building be?
Well, the new cottage is bigger than the old one, so it'll definitely creep towards that area.
But I wondered if you could use that area for like a rack-mounted solar installation.
It's definitely something I've thought about. I mean, we have to worry about the building codes too. Like I'm not like ground-mounted solar might not be allowed out there. There's very specific rules. Because it's in a provincial park. A provincial park, so it's owned by the government, and you just lease the property technically, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very interesting stuff. We'll keep an eye on it. And if you guys have any thoughts or know anything, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. We're always willing to hear from people, especially if you are in the solar business. It's time for the lightning round, a fast look at the rest of the week's headlines in clean energy and climate change. According to analysis from Goldman, COVID caused electricity demand to boom. Residential consumption, get this is going to blow your mind. Residential consumption is still way above pre-crisis levels, while commercial has only dropped a little bit. And the reason why is because you still have to air condition the office buildings. Even if 1 of 10 people are there, you still have to have the same energy consumption. So then you got people at home using their computers, their heat, their cooling, and cooking, and so that's been an interesting development.
No, that's kind of an unfortunate side effect, but it totally makes sense. So 2.5 years on in the pandemic, we still have lots of people working at home, which works well. But, at least half of people, probably more, are back in the office. But yeah, absolutely. Now we have to heat and cool both places all day because not everybody is doing the same thing. Some people at home, some at work.
So if Vancouver becomes the first Canadian city to sue big oil, like it's looking like, there's a long history of denial for a court to consider. The oil exec behind the first ever commercial oil sands project in Alberta, which is tar sands, mining oil from tarry, oily sand and getting the oil out of it, was warned about climate change back in 1959. We are old, Brian, but we are not that old. So it was it was before our lifetimes when we were just sperm and eggs.
And oil execs were aware back then.
Okay, between 2010 and 2021, onshore wind turbines got more than 70% larger and 70% more powerful in Brazil, Canada, China, and Germany. So last decade, these suckers are bigger, and you're getting more electricity for the cost. So in China in 2010, the average turbine had a capacity of 1.4 megawatts and a diameter of 65 meters. By 2021, it was double that at 3 megawatts and 145 meters, which is more than twice the size of the diameter.
That's massive. Bigger, for whatever reason, in terms of the physics, bigger is better for wind turbines.
And I remember talking about this on a recent show as they got bigger and bigger, that they theorized that there is a cutoff as to the advantage of that. Well, we'll have to see, because sometimes they say that and then something gets proven wrong and suddenly it goes into outer space that's so big. A Tesla Model 3 from Guelph, Ontario just hit 500,000 kilometers or 310,000 miles. That is a Tesla Model 3. And now there are other cars that have hit 1 million kilometers, but according to the owner, it's still on its original battery, motors, and its original brakes, because they use regenerative braking. How about that?
Yeah, one of the great advantages of EVs is your brakes tend to last forever.
The Prius Prime from Toyota, the PHEV, that is the plug-in version of their popular Toyota Prius hybrid, that you can get 40 kilometers under ideal circumstances of driving, or 30 miles, is on pace to see a 55% decline in U.S. sales, 2022 vis 2021. Brian, this is further proof that Toyota doesn't get it, that the plug-in hybrid days are over, and plus they're too short a range. People want EVs.
Plug-in hybrids are definitely one of the casualties of BEV adoption, because once fully electric cars are possible, nobody wants a plug-in hybrid. It would have made sense 10, 15 years ago, but Toyota did not see the writing on the wall there, and they are going to pay the price.
We have listeners in Pakistan, and we hardly ever talk about Pakistan, but Pakistan is going for 60% renewables now by 2030, which is better than our local jurisdiction, which is looking at 50%. And it makes me shake my head. They're pledging $600 billion to do this, and around 10.5% of Pakistan's total installed power generation capacity in 2020 actually comes from renewables, wind, solar, biogas. And they're looking at 30% EVs by 2030, which is low by international standards, but it's Pakistan, and that's interesting, and it might, if the world market brings them down in price, that could be quite a bit higher.
Yeah, so only 10% renewables now for the grid, but 60% by 2030. That's a decent target.
We used to talk about it being 10 years. Now it's 7.5. It's 3/4 of a decade already, because we've been on the air so long.
We've been doing the podcast for over 2 years now, and time flies.
And finally this week, Brian, Germany set a solar record during the July European heat wave, which coincided with increased demand for air conditioning. So solar heat wave, solar production record during the record heat wave worked out well for them. Keep in mind, though, that heating solar panels is not a good thing. And I've known this. I know that they get less efficient after they heat up to 25 degrees Celsius, which isn't that warm. It's like 77 Fahrenheit. And I can see it in my own panels, even on a 12 degree, a cool day in spring where it's not windy and they heat up on the roof. The roof sort of builds up heat, and you can see it, it's probably hit 25 degrees because it started to level off when I didn't expect it to on the graph. Solar panels around the world are manufactured and tested to function optimally at 77 Fahrenheit or 25 degrees, and the range in which most solar panels can still operate at peak efficiency is between 15 Celsius and 35 Celsius. So when a panel heats up too much, this is something I've always wondered, and now I have the answer. When a panel heats up too much, its electrons are already in an excited state once the sunlight is absorbed, reducing the efficiency and the voltage it can generate. So those electrons that are bouncing around up there, they have to go from A to B, are already excited.
It's like when you're sunbathing, James,
Sure.
in the backyard. your skin molecules just get too excited.
And Brian, my son, he works for the city, which has access to satellite images, and he showed me a picture of me in my pool. I think I tweeted that out. It's all too clear that I'm a fat bastard laying in this pool in spring with half the solar cover off. It is far greater detail. This is what I ponder out there when I'm floating in my pool, Brian, as a disgustingly overweight man. Is that plane flying over? Is there a satellite that's going to take? Well, it did. It did.
That's bad news. So there's pictures exist of the backyard party I had last week.
No. I mean, it's possible. I mean, that would be the best case scenario, but they're not constantly taking pictures.
Well, I have a lot of paparazzi, Jay.
Yeah, they buy their own satellites to take pictures of your parties. So depending on where a solar panel is installed, high temperatures can reduce its electricity output efficiency by anywhere from 10 to 25%. So here in Canada, when it's cold good. Heat, not necessarily so much, but where it is hot, you get a lot more sun hours, and where it's cold, you get less sun hours. So they two don't necessarily offset each other, but they do a little bit.
And if we go with that vertical orientation that you were talking about earlier with bifacial panels, they're just not going to heat up as much. I mean, my panels just get insanely hot at the peak of the summer.
Well, that's it for our show this week. We're a little bit shorter because it's the summertime and I'm heading to the lake. So remember, we like to hear from you. Contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. That is cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. Pick up your pen and start writing right now. We're on Twitter and TikTok at Clean Energy Pod. Don't forget our YouTube channel. You can watch us and get special features. And you can leave us voicemail feedback at speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow. Remember, kids, if you're new, subscribe so you get the show's delivered to you every week, because we're here every week. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, see you next week.